My name is Carol Thompson, I'm 68 years old, and my own children tried to have me declared mentally incompetent, just so they could steal my massive lottery winnings. Before I tell you about the satisfying moment I legally took control of every single penny they had, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. The air in my living room was so thick with resentment, you could have cut it with a knife. My daughter Susan stood ramrod straight by the fireplace, her arms crossed so tightly I thought she might snap a bone. Her perfectly manicured finger was pointed, shaking towards the driveway. "Are you out of your mind, Mother?" she seethed, her voice a low, vicious hiss. Completely and utterly insane? Outside, bathed in the golden Texas sun, was a brand-new gleaming silver Honda Accord. My grandson Leo, her own son, was lovingly polishing the hood. A grin of pure, unadulterated joy plastered across his face. He had his headphones in, lost in his own world, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside the house. My son, Mark, stood beside his sister, playing the part of the calm, rational one, which always meant he was being the most condescending. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, a gesture meant to convey deep, paternalistic concern. "Mom, this is exactly what we were worried about," he said, his tone dripping with fake pity. "Last week you called us practically in tears, saying you couldn't afford your heart medication. We were talking about pooling our money for your funeral. And now this. A $30,000 car? This is a dangerous, impulsive financial decision. This is proof that you need supervision." Supervision. The word hung in the air, ugly and sharp. They looked like vultures, perched in my own living room. The same living room where I'd bandaged their scraped knees and helped them with their homework. The same room where I'd hosted their high school graduation parties and comforted Susan through her messy divorce. Now they were looking at me not as their mother, but as a problem to be managed, an asset to be controlled. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. I just looked at them, letting their accusations splatter against the wall of my silence. I calmly picked up my teacup from the coaster on the end table, my hand perfectly steady. "First of all," I said, my voice even, "it's a Honda Civic, not an Accord. A bit more modest. And it was $25,000, not $30,000. Susan's face contorted in a sneer. "Oh, that makes it so much better. That's still $25,000 you don't have. Money you should be using for your health, for your future. We've been discussing your living situation, your inheritance." "My inheritance?" I cut in, raising an eyebrow. "Funny you should bring that up. I thought you were worried about my health." Mark stepped forward, taking on his bank loan officer persona. "This isn't about the inheritance, Mom. This is about your well-being. Your cognitive decline. We have a responsibility as your children to protect you from yourself. And to protect the family's assets." There it was. The truth wrapped in a flimsy blanket of feigned concern. I let the silence stretch, letting their ugly words curdle in the air between us. I looked at my daughter, her face twisted with fury over a car she didn't have to pay for. I looked at my son, his expression a mask of condescending pity for a mother he believed was losing her mind. My own children. Finally, I took a slow, deliberate sip of my now lukewarm tea, and set the cup down in its saucer with a soft clink that sounded like a gunshot in the tense room. They both flinched. "You want to know where the money came from?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "You really want to talk about finances and bad decisions?" I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto theirs, refusing to let them look away. "It all started 4 weeks ago, on a Wednesday morning that I will never forget. It was the day I became the wealthiest woman in the state of Texas. But let's rewind. 4 weeks ago it was a Wednesday just like any other Wednesday. The Houston air was already thick and soupy, even at 7 a.m. I was sitting at my small kitchen table, the one my late husband, David, had bought at a garage sale 30 years ago and refinished himself. The varnish is worn thin in the spot where I rest my elbows every morning, reading the paper and drinking my coffee. It's a quiet life. A predictable life. My weekly ritual for the past 20 years was to walk down to Miller's Corner Store and buy a Powerball ticket. David always used to laugh about it. "You've got a better chance of getting struck by lightning while riding a unicycle, Carol," he'd say, but he'd still slip a $5 bill into my pocket every Tuesday night. "For your investment portfolio," he'd joke. After he passed, I kept doing it. It felt like keeping a little piece of him with me. I always played the same numbers. His birthday, our anniversary, and the day our grandson Leo was born. It was sentimental foolishness, I knew. But it was my sentimental foolishness. That Wednesday morning, the TV was murmuring in the living room while I rinsed my coffee cup. It was the local news, and they were announcing the winning Powerball numbers from the night before. I never checked them like that. I usually waited until I went to the store the next week and had the clerk scan the ticket. It was part of the ritual, the little moment of suspense. But that morning, for some reason, I stopped. I dried my hands on my apron and listened. And last night's winning Powerball numbers are... The perky news anchor announced. The first number was 14. David's birthday. A little jolt went through me. Just a coincidence. The next number is 23. The day we got married. My heart did a little flutter. Okay, that was a little strange. I walked over to the refrigerator, where the ticket was held up by a cheap magnet shaped like the state of Texas. My hand was shaking slightly as I plucked it from under the magnet, followed by 31. The anchor's voice seemed to be coming from a great distance. I looked at the ticket. There it was. 31. The day Leo was born. My breath caught in my throat. This was impossible. This couldn't be happening. My kitchen, with its peeling linoleum and humming old refrigerator, suddenly felt like a movie set. Nothing seemed real. Then we have 45 and 58. I scanned the ticket, my eyes blurring. They were there. They were all there. My fingers, wrinkled and spotted with age, traced the numbers as if I could absorb the reality of them through my skin. And the Powerball is 6. The ticket fell from my hand and fluttered to the floor. Powerball 6. The number of years Leo had been cancer-free after a childhood scare. A number I'd added to the rotation in silent, grateful prayer. All 6 numbers. The news anchor was saying something about the jackpot. A single winning ticket sold right here in Harris County. A grand prize of $333 million. $333 million. I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, my legs giving out from under me. I stared at the worn-out cabinets, the chipped coffee mug, the little pot of wilting basil on the windowsill. The world looked exactly the same, but everything had changed. Everything. My first instinct, a raw primal urge, was to grab the phone. To call Susan. To call Mark. I could already imagine their voices, the shock, the disbelief turning into ecstatic joy. We could pay off their mortgages. Set up college funds for their kids that would change the trajectory of their lives. Susan could finally quit the high-pressure real estate job that made her so brittle and unhappy. Mark could stop worrying about his next promotion at the bank. We could be a family without the constant, grinding pressure of money hanging over every conversation. I reached for the phone on the wall, the old landline I still kept. My fingers hovered over the speed dial for Susan. I could almost hear her shriek of delight. But then something stopped me. A memory, cold and sharp, cut through the fog of my euphoria. The memory that stopped my hand was from last Christmas. The whole family was gathered in my living room. I was a little tired from all the cooking, and I'd sat down in my favorite armchair for a moment. I must have closed my eyes because Susan and her husband were talking in low voices near the kitchen, thinking I was asleep. If she would just sell this house, Susan had whispered, the sound sharp as broken glass. The property value in this neighborhood is insane. That alone would be a huge load off our minds for her end-of-life care. Her husband had murmured something in agreement. It wasn't the words themselves, but the clinical, calculating tone. They were discussing my home, my life, as if it were an item on a balance sheet. Then there was Mark. Just a few months ago, he'd called with his usual monthly check-in. It always started with a perfunctory, "How are you, Mom?" before pivoting to his real agenda. "You know, Mom," he'd said in his most patient, patronizing voice, "I was just running some numbers. The upkeep on a house this size, plus property taxes and insurance. It's a significant drain on your fixed income. We found a wonderful senior community, Golden Vistas, that handles everything. It's just a more responsible financial choice. A responsible choice." He made it sound like he was advising a client on their mortgage, not talking to his own mother about leaving the home she'd lived in for 40 years. He wasn't worried about my happiness. He was worried about his future inheritance shrinking. These memories and a dozen others like them flooded back to me in that moment. washing away the pure joy of my win and leaving a cold, hard stone in my stomach. For years, I'd ignored the little slights, the casual dismissiveness. I told myself they were just busy, stressed with their own lives and careers. But now, with the winning ticket lying on my kitchen floor, I saw it all with a terrible, piercing clarity. When they looked at me, did they see their mother? Or did they see a ticking clock, a walking, talking investment portfolio that was underperforming? The euphoria was gone. In its place, a different feeling began to grow. A cold, quiet resolve. I wasn't going to call them. Not yet. The next day, I didn't call my kids. I called David's old golf buddy, Arthur Henderson. Arthur wasn't just a friend. He was one of the sharpest estate lawyers in Houston. He answered on the second ring. "Carol, what a pleasant surprise. How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice warm and familiar. "Arthur," I said, my voice steady, "I need your help. And I need you to be completely discreet. Not a word to anyone, especially not my children." There was a pause. "Of course, Carol. You sound serious. Is everything all right?" "Everything has changed, Arthur," I said. I met him at his downtown office that afternoon. The office was all dark wood and leather, smelling of old books and success. I placed the lottery ticket on his vast, polished desk. He put on his reading glasses, looked at the ticket, looked at the official lottery website on his computer monitor, and then looked back at the ticket. He took his glasses off and simply stared at me. "My God, Carol," he whispered, his professional composure cracking for just a moment. "The money isn't the issue, Arthur," I said, leaning forward. "I have a question for you as a friend. How do I find out if my children love me? Or if they just love what I'm worth?" Arthur leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. He was a kind man, but he was also a shrewd one. He'd seen the ugly side of family and money 1,000 times in his career. He looked at me, his eyes full of a sad understanding. "I think," he said slowly, "that for a sum this large, you don't just need a lawyer. You need a plan. A very, very good plan." And so, for the next 3 weeks, that's what we did. We worked in secret. We set up trusts, corporations, and foundations. We hired a team of financial advisors who specialized in sudden wealth. It was a dizzying new world of acronyms and investment strategies. But through it all, Arthur and I worked on a different kind of plan. A more personal one. A test. It was simple, it was cruel, and it was absolutely necessary. I had to know the truth once and for all. Before I set the test in motion, however, the universe gave me one last painful piece of confirmation that I was doing the right thing. 2 weeks after my win, while Arthur and his team were quietly moving mountains of money around in the background, my 68th birthday arrived. It fell on a Tuesday. I didn't mention it to anyone. Part of me, a small, hopeful, foolish part, wanted to see who would remember on their own. I woke up that morning with a familiar ache of loneliness. Birthdays are hard after you've lost your spouse. David always made such a fuss. He'd bring me coffee in bed and a slightly burnt piece of toast, and his off-key singing of "Happy Birthday" was the best sound in the world. I kept my phone by my side all day waiting for it to ring. I told myself not to be silly. Susan was a busy real estate agent, always in meetings. Mark was a rising star at his bank, consumed with spreadsheets and clients. They had their own lives. Just after midnight, as I was getting ready for bed, my cell phone buzzed. It lit up the dark room. My heart leaped. It was a FaceTime call. From Leo. I answered, and his smiling face filled the screen, broadcasting live from his messy dorm room at UT Austin. "Happy birthday, Grandma," he shouted, his voice full of warmth. I wanted to be the first one to call. Did I make it? Tears sprang to my eyes. I blinked them back, not wanting him to see. "You did, sweetheart. You're the very first." We talked for a half hour about his classes, his part-time job at the campus library, and the funny-looking squirrel he'd seen outside his window. He didn't ask for anything. He just wanted to talk to his grandma on her birthday. When we hung up, the ache in my chest had eased, replaced by a warm glow. He remembered. That's all that mattered. The next day came and went. Around 3 p.m. I got a text from Susan. One single line. "HBD, Mom. Super swamped today. Talk later." HBD. She couldn't even be bothered to type out the words. From Mark and his wife, Brenda? Nothing. Absolute silence. The entire day. I tried to rationalize it. I tried to make excuses for them. But the truth was a cold, heavy weight in my gut. They had forgotten. The day after my birthday, my phone finally rang. It was Brenda, my daughter-in-law. "Hi, Carol," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. There was no mention of my birthday, no apology. She went straight to the point. "Listen, Mark and I were hoping to talk to you about something. We're trying to get a loan for a new SUV, for the kids, but the bank is being a little difficult. We were wondering if you'd be willing to co-sign for us? It would be a huge help." I was stunned into silence. They ignore my birthday, don't call, don't text, and then have the audacity to call the next day asking me to take on a financial liability for them? "Brenda," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "No, I'm not going to do that." The sweetness in her voice vanished, replaced by an icy edge. "What do you mean, no? It's just a signature. We've been very good to you, Carol. We visit. We call." "You didn't call yesterday," I said quietly. There was a beat of confused silence. Yesterday? What was yesterday? And that was it. That was the moment the last shred of doubt in my mind evaporated. It wasn't just that they were thoughtless. It was that they saw me as a utility, a resource, a means to an end, someone to be managed and when needed someone to be used. "I'm sorry, Carol, but I just don't understand why you're being so selfish," Brenda said, her voice rising in frustration. "After all we do for you." I didn't hear the rest of what she said. I had already hung up the phone. I sat there in the quiet house, the silence ringing in my ears. The word echoed in my mind. Selfish. That night I called Arthur. "The test," I said, my voice hard as steel. "We're doing it tomorrow." The next morning my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. There was no going back. I had my script, a simple story, plausible enough to be believed. I took a deep, shaky breath and dialed Susan's number. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice clipped and impatient. "Mom, I'm literally walking into a showing. Can this be quick?" "Susan, honey, I'm so sorry to bother you." I began, injecting a tremor into my voice. I was a retired nurse. I knew how to sound convincingly frail. I'm in a bit of a bind. The pharmacy changed my prescription for my arrhythmia, and it's a new brand. My insurance won't cover it, and my social security check doesn't come for another week. I'm short about $300. There was a long, heavy sigh on the other end of the line. It was a sound I knew well. It was the sound of me being an inconvenience. $300? She repeated, as if I'd asked for a kidney. "Mom, I just had to put 4 new tires on the Mercedes. Things are tight right now." "I know, dear, and I wouldn't ask if it wasn't an emergency," I pleaded, hating the pathetic sound of my own voice, even though it was an act. "The doctor said I can't miss a dose. It's for my heart." I could hear the tapping of her manicured nails against her phone case. She was weighing her options. Not whether she could help, but whether she wanted to. "Look," she said finally, her voice losing all pretense of warmth. "This is a pattern, Mom. You need to learn how to budget better on your fixed income. I can't keep bailing you out. It's a form of enabling." Enabling. The word hit me like a slap. I enabled her to go to college by working double shifts. I enabled her to get her first apartment by co-signing the lease. I enabled her to take a vacation after her divorce by watching Leo for 2 weeks straight. "Susan, I'm not asking for a bailout," I said, my voice cracking for real this time. "I'm asking for a small loan. I'll pay you back the second my check comes in." Another sigh, louder this time, full of theatrical frustration. "I have to go. My clients are here." "But Susan, my medication." And then she said it. The words that would be seared into my memory forever. The words that sealed her fate. "Figure it out, Mom," she snapped, her voice as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. "It is not my problem that you're sick." Click. The line went dead. I stood there in my kitchen, the receiver still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. My whole body felt numb, as if I'd been submerged in ice water. It wasn't just a no. It was the dismissal, the utter lack of compassion. Not my problem. I, her mother, who had brought her into this world, whose body had ached for her, whose heart had broken for her 1,000 times, was not her problem. I slowly placed the receiver back in its cradle. I didn't cry. The hurt was too deep for tears. It was a cold, hard certainty that settled in my bones. I had my first answer. I let an hour pass, letting the shock subside and the cold resolve harden. I had to see this through. I had to know if it was just her, or if the rot went deeper. With a hand that was now perfectly steady, I picked up the phone again and dialed my son. Mark picked up on the second ring, his voice professionally cheerful. "Mark Thompson speaking." "Mark, it's Mom," I said. The cheerfulness evaporated instantly, replaced by a weary sigh. "Oh, hi Mom. I'm right in the middle of a meeting. Is this important?" I could hear the faint, sharp whisper of my daughter-in-law, Brenda, in the background. "Is that your mom again? Tell her we're broke. Mention the SUV loan." My son cleared his throat, ignoring her. I launched into the same story I told Susan, about the new heart medication, the insurance issue, the $300 shortfall. I kept my voice weak, playing the part of the confused, elderly woman they already believed me to be. When I finished, there was a long pause. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head, the calculations being made. "Mom," he began, and the condescending tone was so thick I could have spread it on toast. With all due respect, as someone who works in finance, I have to say this is a classic example of poor money management. You can't just have unexpected expenses like this crop up. You need a contingency fund. "My contingency fund was used up last month when the water heater broke, Mark," I said, the statement being entirely true. "This isn't about poor planning. It's just a bad week." "But it's always a bad week, isn't it?" he said, and I could hear Brenda snicker in the background. "Last year it was the car repairs. Before that it was the plumbing. Mom, this is what Susan and I have been talking about. You're becoming a financial liability. A liability to my own son, the boy whose college tuition I had paid for by taking out a second mortgage on my house. The man whose student loans I had quietly finished paying off 5 years ago as a surprise, a debt he never knew I had shouldered. Mark, I'm your mother. I'm not a line item on a spreadsheet," I said, my voice trembling with the rage I was struggling to contain. "I need help. Are you going to help me or not?" He let out a long, suffering sigh. "Look, Mom, this isn't about just giving you money. This is about your long-term well-being. Giving you $300 now is like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. It doesn't solve the underlying problem." "And what?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "Is the underlying problem?" "The problem is that you can't manage on your own anymore," he said, his voice rising. "This is exactly why we've been looking into Golden Vistas for you. They handle all your medications, your meals, your finances. You wouldn't have to call us for these crises." So that was it. The solution to my problem wasn't a small temporary loan from a loving son. The solution was to ship me off to a facility so I would no longer be a burden, so they could finally wash their hands of me. "I see," I said softly. "I'm glad you do," he said, misinterpreting my tone as acquiescence. "Now, Mom, because I love you, and because this is for your own good, I think we need to practice some tough love here." I held my breath. What fresh hell was this? Susan and I have talked about it, and we think we've been too soft. We've been enabling you. So, for the time being, I think it's best if I create some distance, to allow you to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. "What are you saying, Mark?" I whispered, though I already knew. "I'm going to have to block your number for a while, Mom," he said, the words casual, as if he were talking about changing his brand of coffee. "Brenda thinks it's for the best. Sometimes you have to be cruel to be kind." And before I could even respond, before I could even process the sheer monstrous cruelty of what he'd just said, the line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand. He hadn't just said no. He hadn't just lectured me. He had erased me. With the press of a button, my own son had cut me out of his life because I had dared to ask for help. I didn't put the phone down. I just held it, my knuckles white. The pain was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest. This was worse than Susan's cold dismissal. This was a deliberate, calculated act of abandonment. My own son had just thrown me away. And in that moment of absolute devastation, I knew there was only one call left to make. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial the numbers. My vision was blurry with tears I refused to let fall. A part of me was screaming, "Don't do it, don't put your broken heart through this again." What if Leo, my sweet, kind Leo, had been tainted by his mother's selfishness? What if he, too, saw me as a burden? I didn't think I could survive a third blow. But I had to know. The entire future, the entire meaning of the fortune that was now mine depended on this last call. I dialed his number. It rang once, twice. My stomach was in knots. Grandma! His voice burst through the phone, warm and bright and genuinely happy to hear from me. I could hear the clatter of keyboards and quiet chatter in the background. He was at the campus library where he worked. What's up? Is everything okay? Just the immediate concern in his voice made a lump form in my throat. Oh, Leo, honey. I'm so sorry to bother you at work. I started trying to keep my voice from breaking. I repeated my well-rehearsed story about the medication, the insurance mix-up, the $300 gap. When I finished, there was a pause. It was only a second, but in that second my heart plummeted. Here it comes, I thought. The lecture, the sigh, the excuses. But what came next changed everything. Okay, he said, his voice suddenly serious and focused. Don't you worry about a thing, Grandma. I've got about $500 in my savings account from this job. It's every penny I have, but it's yours. I can Venmo it to you right now. Will that be enough? I gasped, a strangled sob escaping my lips. I couldn't speak. He was offering me everything he had, without a moment's hesitation. But that's not all, he continued, his voice tight with worry. I'm more concerned about you. Are you okay? Are you feeling all right? $300 for one prescription sounds really high. Do you need me to come home? I can talk to my professor. I can get my shift covered. I can be on the road in an hour and be in Houston by tonight. I can take you to the doctor myself. He was willing to drop everything. To drive 3 hours in the dark in the middle of his midterm exams, just to check on his old grandma. Not because of money, but because he was genuinely worried about me. That's when the tears I'd been holding back finally broke free. They streamed down my face, hot and silent. They weren't tears of pain or anger anymore. They were tears of overwhelming, heartbreaking relief. Oh, sweetie. I managed to choke out, my voice thick with emotion. No, you can't take your savings. And you have to study for your exams. I couldn't possibly let you do that. Grandma, stop, he said, his voice firm but gentle. You have never, not once in my entire life, asked me for anything. You've only ever given. If you need help, then I'm helping. No arguments. Now give me your Venmo. And I'm serious, if you want me to come home, you just say the word and I'm in the car. We talked for a few more minutes and I finally, tearfully, convinced him that I would be okay until the weekend. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and just cried. I cried for the sons and daughters I thought I had, and I cried with gratitude for the grandson I was so lucky to have. He had passed the test. He had passed it with flying colors, soaring high above the wreckage of his mother and uncle's failures. The pain in my heart was still there, a raw, gaping wound from their betrayal. But now it was mixed with something else. A fierce, protective love for this wonderful young man. And a new, ice-cold clarity. I knew exactly what I had to do. The game had changed. My children weren't just going to learn a lesson. They were about to learn that when you treat your mother like she's worthless, you might just find out what you're worth to her. And the price was going to be higher than they could ever imagine. We're back in my living room. The air is still vibrating with tension. Susan and Mark are staring at me. Their faces a mixture of confusion and indignation after my cryptic statement. What do you mean, that's when you became the wealthiest woman in Texas? Mark scoffs, crossing his arms. It's his go-to power move when he feels his authority is being challenged. Mom, are you having delusions? Did you hit a scratch-off for $1,000 and get carried away? Delusions. I say, letting the word hang in the air. That's a very interesting choice of words, Mark. We'll come back to that one later. I turn my attention back to the present moment, to the source of their immediate outrage. The shiny new car in my driveway. You're right about one thing, I say, looking them both in the eye. Last week I called you. Both of you. I told you I was in a desperate situation. I told you I needed money for medication that I needed to live. Susan rolls her eyes. Oh, here we go. The guilt trip. No, dear. I say, my voice sweet as poison. No trip. Just a recap of the facts. I called you, Susan. And you told me, and I believe I'm quoting you correctly, to figure it out, because it wasn't your problem that I was sick. And then you hung up on me. Susan's face flushes a blotchy red. She opens her mouth to protest, but no words come out. And then, I continue, turning to Mark. I called you. You gave me a lecture on financial responsibility. You accused me of being a liability. And then, for my own good, of course, you blocked my number so I couldn't contact you in my moment of need. Mark stares down at the carpet, refusing to meet my gaze. His ears are bright pink. But then, I say, my voice softening as I glance out the window at Leo, who is now happily vacuuming the interior of his new car. I made one more call. I called my grandson. Your son, Susan. Your nephew, Mark. I told him the exact same story. I let the silence stretch. I want them to think about it. I want them to squirm. Do you know what he did? I ask, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't lecture me. He didn't sigh. He didn't make excuses. He offered me every single penny he had in the world, $500 he had saved from his part-time library job. And then he offered to drop everything, miss his midterm exams, and drive 3 hours in the middle of the night, just to make sure I was okay. Leo chooses that moment to look up and wave at me through the window, his face beaming. I smile and wave back. When I turn back to my children, their faces are stone. So yes, I say, my voice hardening again. I bought him a car. You want to call it an impulsive financial decision? I call it a down payment on decency, a bonus for basic human compassion, a reward for being the only person in this family who treated me like a human being instead of an inconvenience. Mark finally finds his voice, sputtering. This is emotional blackmail. You're manipulating us. You're trying to make us feel guilty for setting healthy boundaries. Healthy boundaries? I laugh, a short, sharp, bitter sound. Is that what you call it? Blocking your elderly mother's number when she says she needs heart medication? I call it cruelty, Mark. I call it abandonment. This doesn't make any sense. Susan mutters, shaking her head as if trying to clear it. If you were so broke last week, where did the money for a $25,000 car come from? Did you take out a reverse mortgage? Oh my God, Mom, did you go to a payday loan shark? I just smile. They are so consumed with their own small, greedy world, they can't see the bigger picture. They're like ants arguing over a breadcrumb when a whole picnic has been laid out before them. You're asking the wrong question, Susan, I say, leaning back in my chair. You shouldn't be asking where the money for the car came from. I pause, letting the suspense build until it's a physical presence in the room. You should be asking where the money for everything else came from. And with that, I slowly get up from my chair and walk towards the refrigerator. The walk from my armchair to the kitchen refrigerator felt like the longest walk of my life. Every step was deliberate. I could feel their eyes boring into my back, a mixture of fury, confusion, and a dawning terrible suspicion. The old linoleum floor creaked under my feet. The only other sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, counting down the seconds to the moment their world would shatter. I reached the refrigerator. There, held by the tacky Texas-shaped magnet, was a single folded piece of paper. It looked so ordinary, so insignificant, just a slip from the corner store. But I knew it was the most powerful object in the room, in the entire state. I plucked it from the fridge. It was a replica, of course. The real one was safely tucked away in a bank vault, but this one, which I'd had laminated at an office supply store, was for this exact moment. It was for the theater of it all. I walked back into the living room. Susan and Mark were still frozen in place, watching me as if I were holding a live grenade. Leo had finished vacuuming and was now wiping down the dashboard, still blissfully unaware. I didn't hand the ticket to Susan or Mark. I walked over to the doorway where Leo was about to come inside, holding a handful of trash from his car. Leo, sweetheart, I said, my voice gentle. Could you read something for me? My eyes aren't what they used to be. He looked confused but took the laminated slip from my hand. Sure, Grandma. It looks like a lottery ticket. Mark snorted. Oh, for God's sake, Mom. This is your grand reveal? A losing lottery ticket? Are you trying to teach us a lesson about gambling? Just read the numbers, Leo, I said, my eyes never leaving the faces of my children. Leo squinted at the paper. Okay. It says the winning numbers for the Powerball drawing on September 17th were 14, 23, 31, 45, 58. And the Powerball is 6. He read them off casually, the numbers meaning nothing to him. But I watched as the color drained from Mark's face. I saw Susan's eyes widen, a flicker of horrified recognition in them. They hadn't paid attention to the news that day, but the numbers. The numbers were our family's numbers. They knew them as well as I did. Leo looked up from the ticket, his brow furrowed. "Wait a second," he said slowly, the pieces starting to click into place in his sharp young mind. "Grandma, these are our numbers. Grandpa's birthday, your anniversary, my birthday." He looked from the ticket to my face, his eyes growing impossibly wide. "No way. Is this real? Read the prize amount at the bottom, sweetheart," I said softly. His eyes darted back to the ticket. His voice was a choked whisper. "Jackpot winner 1 ticket. Harris County $333 million. He looked up, his face completely pale. He looked at his mother, at his uncle, and then back at me. "Grandma," he breathed. "That's right," I said, my voice clear and strong, ringing through the stunned silence of the room. "4 weeks ago, I won the Powerball jackpot. $333 million. After taxes, a little over $210 million. So you see, my dear ungrateful children, when you're worth over $200 million, a $25,000 car for the only person who showed you a shred of kindness is pocket change." The silence that followed was magnificent. It was absolute. I could hear the blood pounding in my own ears. Susan's mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. Mark had physically staggered backward and sunk onto the arm of the sofa, his face the color of ash. It was Susan who found her voice first, a high-pitched, desperate squeak. "Mom, you're joking. This is a joke. A sick, cruel joke." "Do I look like I'm joking, Susan?" I asked, arching an eyebrow. Mark lunged forward, his eyes wild, and tried to snatch the ticket from Leo's hand. "Let me see that." Leo, bless his heart, pulled it back instinctively. "Uncle Mark, don't." "It doesn't matter," I said, stopping them both with the force of my voice. "That's just a copy. A souvenir. The real money has already been claimed, invested, and placed into a series of irrevocable trusts. The wheels have been in motion for weeks." I settled back into my armchair, feeling a sense of power I hadn't felt in years. I was no longer the frail, needy old woman they saw me as. I was the one holding all the cards. $200 million, Mark whispered, the words sounding like a prayer and a curse all at once. And that's when the performance truly began. The frantic, pathetic backpedaling. "Mom!" Susan cried, rushing forward and trying to grab my hand. Pulled it away. "Mom, we had no idea. If we had known, when you called, we just thought you were." "You thought I was what, Susan?" I cut her off, my voice like ice. "A burden? A nuisance? Let me finish your sentence for you. If you had known I was rich, you would have helped me. Is that it?" She had the decency to look ashamed, but the greed in her eyes was like a physical thing, a hungry, desperate light. "No, that's not what I meant." "Isn't it?" I said. "Let's be honest with each other for the first time in years. Your true colors have been revealed. And let me tell you, they are ugly." But they didn't know the half of it. The car, the ticket, that was just the appetizer. The main course was about to be served. The apologies came thick and fast, a pathetic, desperate torrent. They were sorry, so very sorry. They were stressed. They didn't mean it. It was a misunderstanding. It was a test of their own to see if I was... I don't know, they couldn't even finish their own ridiculous lies. I held up a hand and the torrent stopped. "Save it," I said, my voice cutting through their babbling. "Your apologies are as worthless as your excuses. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry you fumbled the winning lottery ticket of your lives." I stood up and walked over to the antique writing desk in the corner, the one that had belonged to my own mother. From the bottom drawer, I pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. It was at least 3 inches thick, bound with a rubber band. I walked back to my chair and dropped it on the coffee table between us. The thud it made was solid, final. Susan and Mark stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. What is that?" Mark asked, his voice trembling. "You see," I began, settling back into my chair, "when a person of my advanced years suddenly comes into a significant amount of wealth, certain precautions must be taken. Arthur Henderson, my lawyer, was very insistent on this point. You have to protect your assets from predators. From people who might try to take advantage of you. People who might, for example, try to have you declared incompetent. I let that last word hang in the air. I saw Mark flinch as if he'd been struck. So for the past 3 weeks, I continued, tapping a finger on the thick folder. While you two were busy ignoring my birthday and blocking my calls, I employed the services of a very discreet, very thorough private investigator. The last traces of color drained from both of their faces. Susan looked like she was going to be physically sick. You had us followed, she whispered, horrified. I had my potential liabilities investigated, I corrected her. I needed a full, clear picture of the financial and personal character of the people who believed they were my primary heirs. And the report, my dears, is quite illuminating. I snapped the rubber band off the folder. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. I pulled out the first document from the top. It was a spreadsheet. Let's start with finances, I said briskly. You've both been crying poverty to me for years. But my investigator found otherwise. Susan, your monthly spa and salon visits average over $600. Mark, your golf club membership is $400 a month, not including the money you spend at the 19th hole. Between the two of you, you spent over $3,000 on restaurants and bars in the last month alone. I tossed a stack of credit card statements, helpfully highlighted by the investigator, onto the table. But this is my favorite part, I said, pulling out another document. This is a tally of all the loans and gifts I've given you over the past 10 years. The down payment for your house, Susan. The money to cover Mark's bad investment in that tech startup. The emergency funds for car repairs, dental work, and luxury vacations. The grand total comes to $117,000. Not a single penny of which was ever paid back. Leo, who had been standing in the doorway in silent shock, let out a low whistle. But the financial documents aren't the most interesting part, I said, my voice dropping. I pulled out a thin stack of papers. They were transcripts. My investigator was also very good with technology. It's amazing what a long-range microphone can pick up, isn't it? This, for example, is a transcript of a very interesting conversation you two had on the patio at your last family barbecue. I put on my reading glasses. Ah yes, here it is. Mark, you say, she's getting more and more forgetful. If we start laying the groundwork now, getting a doctor to document her cognitive decline, it will be much easier to get power of attorney when the time comes. And then you, Susan, reply, we have to. If she has a stroke or something and ends up in a home, her medical bills could wipe out the entire value of the house. We have to gain control of the estate before that happens. I looked up at them over the rim of my glasses. They were frozen, their faces masks of pure horror. They had been caught. Utterly and completely. And then there's my personal favorite, I said, flipping a page. A recorded phone call between you, Mark, and you, Brenda. I looked at my son. Your wife seems to believe that my passing would be a huge relief, and wonders if my life insurance policy has a double indemnity clause for accidents. A charming woman, your wife. I let the transcript fall from my fingers onto the pile of evidence. So you see, I said, my voice as cold and hard as a tombstone. I know everything. I know you don't love me. I know you see me as a burden. I know you have been actively plotting to take control of my assets and have been waiting impatiently for me to die. I leaned back, a grim satisfaction washing over me. The test is over. You both failed. Spectacularly. And now comes the final grade. The air in the room was thick with the stench of their shame and fear. They were no longer my children, full of bluster and entitlement. They were just two terrified people who had been caught in a trap of their own making. Mom, please, Susan stammered, tears now streaming down her face, ruining her expensive mascara. We can explain. It wasn't like that. We were just worried. Worried. I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. You were worried you wouldn't get your hands on my money fast enough. Spare me your pathetic lies. We are long past the point of explanations. Mark, ever the pragmatist, was already trying to calculate his next move. What do you want, Mom? He asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. Is this about the inheritance? You're going to cut us out? Fine. You can leave it all to Leo. We understand. We made a mistake. I smiled a slow, cold smile that didn't reach my eyes. Oh, Mark, you still think this is that simple? You think this is just about writing you out of my will? That's where this starts, not where it ends. I told you I'm not just cutting you off. I'm giving you your final grade. And the tuition for this lesson is everything you have. They looked at me, utterly bewildered. As I mentioned, I continued, my voice taking on the crisp, professional tone of my lawyer, Arthur. When one comes into this kind of money, one sets up certain corporate structures for asset protection. 3 weeks ago, Mr. Henderson and I formed a private investment firm. It's called the David Thompson Legacy Fund. A nice touch, don't you think? They just stared, uncomprehending. The purpose of this firm, I explained patiently as if to a child, is to make strategic acquisitions. And for its very first acquisition, the fund purchased a portfolio of distressed consumer debt from several major financial institutions. Mortgages, car loans, high-interest credit card debt, you know the type, Mark. The kind your bank loves to sell off for pennies on the dollar. A flicker of dawning horror appeared in Mark's eyes. He was starting to understand. Susan was still lost. What are you talking about? She demanded. I'm talking about your 30-year mortgage with Bank of America, Susan, I said, pulling a thick legal document from the folder. And your 5-year loan on that shiny Mercedes. And the $27,000 you have spread across 3 different high-interest credit cards. The David Thompson Legacy Fund bought it all. Every last cent. I turned to Mark. And your mortgage, Mark. And the loan on your wife Brenda's new SUV, the one you wanted me to co-sign for. And your frighteningly large balance on your Amex Platinum card. We bought that too. I let the information sink in. I watched their faces as the horrific reality of their new situation dawned on them. You can't do that, Mark stammered, his financial brain struggling to process this hostile familial takeover. There are laws, regulations. Oh, we can, and we did, I said cheerfully. Mr. Henderson assures me it's all perfectly legal. Unusual perhaps, but ironclad. You see, you no longer owe the banks. As of 8 a.m. this morning, you both owe me. I slid 2 more pages across the coffee table. They were custom-printed invoices on heavy, expensive-looking paper, with the David Thompson Legacy Fund logo embossed at the top. Here are your statements of account. Susan, your total consolidated debt comes to $482,000. Mark, yours is a little higher, thanks to your wife's shopping habits, at $563,000. Oh, and I've also added in the $117,000 you've borrowed from me over the years. Call it accrued interest. Susan made a choking sound. Mark looked like he was going to have a heart attack right there on my sofa. But that's not the best part, I said, saving the final twist of the knife. You see, unlike the banks, I'm not interested in minimum monthly payments. The terms of your new loan are quite simple. I am calling the entire debt due. In full. Payment is expected within 90 days. 90 days. Susan shrieked. We don't have $1 million. We can't possibly pay that. I know, I said simply. Which means that in 91 days, my company will begin foreclosure proceedings on both of your homes. We will repossess your cars. We will garnish your wages. We will, in short, liquidate your entire lives to settle your accounts. I leaned back and looked at the 2 people I had given birth to. Their faces a canvas of pure, unadulterated terror. You told me to figure it out, Susan. You told me to learn to stand on my own 2 feet, Mark, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. So here is your chance. Figure it out. The ensuing scene was predictable. The begging, the promises, the desperate, hollow apologies. They would do anything, they said. They would work for me, be my assistants, manage my affairs. They would pay me back somehow. They would spend the rest of their lives making it up to me. I just listened, my heart a cold, still stone in my chest. Their words were meaningless now, just noise. They weren't sorry for the years of neglect and disrespect. They were terrified of the consequences. Work for me? I asked Susan, a flicker of disbelief in my voice. The daughter who couldn't be bothered to type out happy birthday now wants to manage my calendar? The son who blocked my number now wants to be my financial advisor? The hypocrisy is breathtaking. Even for you too. They collapsed into a weeping, pleading mess. But I was done. The part of me that was their mother had died in the last 4 weeks. killed by 1,000 tiny cuts of indifference and one final brutal blow of abandonment. Leo, who had watched the entire horrifying spectacle unfold, finally spoke. His voice was quiet but firm. "Mom, Uncle Mark, stop. Just stop. Can't you see? It's not about the money anymore." It was never about the money. They turned to him, their faces hopeful, thinking perhaps he would be their advocate. But he just looked at them with a profound, sorrowful disappointment that was far more damning than my anger. "You broke her heart," he said simply. "And you broke mine." That was my signal. I stood up, the final act of this tragedy ready to be played out. "My will and the trust documents have been finalized," I announced, my voice leaving no room for argument. "Leo will be the sole heir to my entire estate. The funds will be managed by a professional trustee until he is 30 years old, at which point he will gain full control, with the stipulation that 10% of the estate's annual income must be donated to charities supporting single mothers and nursing education. Two things I know a little something about." Leo looked at me, his eyes wide with the sheer weight of it all. "As for you too," I said, turning to my children for the last time, "I am not entirely heartless. I won't let you be homeless. The foreclosure on your homes will proceed, but once the properties are owned by my company, I will allow you to live in them as renters." Their heads snapped up, a glimmer of hope in their eyes. "You will pay monthly rent at fair market value," I continued, dashing that hope immediately. "And if you are late on a single payment, eviction proceedings will begin the next day. You will learn what it feels like to live with that kind of insecurity." I then walked to my desk and picked up 2 final pieces of paper. I handed one to each of them. They were job applications. "Susan, your reputation in the high-end real estate market is about to be ruined when this story gets out, and trust me, it will. But I've spoken to the manager at the diner down the street where I used to work. They need a waitress for the night shift. It's hard work and the tips are terrible, but it's an honest living. And Mark," I said, "your career at the bank is over. No one will trust a loan officer who tried to have his own mother committed to steal her money. But the local hospital, the one where I worked as a nurse for 30 years, needs orderlies. The pay is minimum wage and the work is unpleasant. But it's a start. It's a chance to learn humility." They stared at the applications in their hands as if they were alien objects. The life they knew was over. The pride, the status, the comfort, all of it gone, replaced by the harsh reality they had always looked down upon. "Now," I said, my voice softening for the first time, "I want you to leave my house. Leave the keys to your cars on the table. They will be sold to cover the initial legal fees. You can call a taxi." They stumbled out in a daze, 2 ghosts haunting the ruins of their own lives. As the front door clicked shut behind them, a profound silence fell over the house. It was over. I felt a small hand on my shoulder. It was Leo. He stood beside my chair, tears in his eyes. "Grandma," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know what to say." I reached up and took his hand, squeezing it tight. "You don't have to say anything, sweetheart. Just promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll remember this day," I said, looking into his kind, honest eyes. "Promise me you'll remember that wealth isn't a prize. It's a responsibility. It doesn't make you better than anyone else. It just gives you a greater capacity to be kind. Promise me you will never, ever treat family like a liability." "I promise, Grandma," he said, hugging me tightly. "I promise." As I stood there, wrapped in my grandson's arms, I looked around the little living room that had witnessed so much of my life. For the first time in years, I didn't feel lonely. I felt peaceful. The lottery had given me money, yes, but my children, in their cruelty, had given me something far more valuable. They had given me clarity. They had shown me the difference between a house and a home, between biology and family, between price and value. And they had given me the priceless gift of knowing, without a single doubt, who truly deserved my love. Thank you for listening to my story. I know it's a difficult one, but I felt it was important to share. Have you ever had a moment where you realized the people you trusted most were not who you thought they were? Let me know your story in the comments below. It helps to know we're not alone. And if you found any part of my story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more. Your support means the world.